Hello, hello, and welcome. Welcome to another episode of Found in Interpretation podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Alain Breton. I am joined once again by with my co-host Brian Bickford, and this week we have Joachim Lépine. Just before we talk with Joachim, I'm going to go a little bit very quickly over his bio, so we know who we're talking about. We're talking to this week, I should say. So Joachim was born in a French-speaking family in Belgium and grew up in the USA before moving to Quebec in 2006. And when he took his first translation course on a whim, he knew he had found his calling. And he went on to earn a bachelor's degree in translation and a master's in education. In the ensuing years, he translated for a myriad of prestigious clients in Quebec and abroad. Um, he um, He's very passionate about translation. He trained for NATO, the United Nations, the European Commission, OTIAC, Magistrad, Editors Canada, the Translation Bureau, and many, many others. And today he's the co-founder of Lion Translation Academy, which offers training to help translators and translation teams to thrive in every area of their practice. I hope I read that well and quickly enough so we can put that away. But hello, Joachim. And in my case, nice to
Hi,
meet
Alain.
you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. So, Brian, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right, thank you. I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm not going to be speaking as much, just to save our listeners their ears and whatnot. But welcome, Joshua. Nice to see you again.
Great to see you.
And yeah. So this is going to be pretty informal. So we're just going to ask you some questions about how you got started, and maybe that's a good place to start because it seems like a very interesting background. Born in Belgium to French family, and then moved to the U.S. Can you share where in the U.S. and how you went from like an English speaking country to like having this love for translation?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, my dad was a university professor who taught French, and he had temporary positions. So he kind of went from one university to the next, and we ended up moving every few years. So we lived in California, Texas, Philadelphia, New Hampshire, and New York before ultimately basically when it was time to go off to college, started looking at my options and thinking, well, I could study in the US. And then it was like we were living in New Hampshire at the time and actually kind of realized that there's this whole French speaking um, province right, just like 30 minutes away, but we didn't actually know that much about it. So, and anyway, we ended up visiting Quebec and falling in love with it. And I moved there and the rest is sort of history. So, but it was interesting growing up in the US. uh, you know, People were very tolerant and accepting and welcoming of French speaking, and it always kind of sounded impressive. But it's funny. My parents would speak to us in French because my dad is Parisian, my mom is Belgian, but my brothers and I would always answer in English. So like we in fact I've been translating my entire life. Like for me it's like breathing. It's like it's just in one ear, one out the other. Well, maybe that's not the best way to put it, but you get the idea. It's sort of hardwired because of how I grew up. And so after bumbling around for a few years and sort of searching for a career, what I wanted to do, I stumbled into translation, and right from the first course just absolutely loved it. Found it so fascinating, both because of the linguistic side and the cultural differences that make it such a fascinating craft, really.
That's cool. Yeah, it reminds me a bit of my own growing up too with a French mom and a British dad, and living in South America for 12 years and speaking Spanish. Well, to everybody that wasn't my parents, and then French with my mom, English with my dad, going to French school. Like, yeah, the language it gets ingrained in you at an early age, and it's proves to be helpful if you're a translator and interpreter. Speaking of which, have you ever thought of doing interpretation, or you love translation and this is your passion and this is what you're sticking to till the end of time?
Yeah, it's funny you'd ask. I mean, I actually did interpret one time. A friend of mine's an interpreter, and she was interpreting at a Christmas tree conference of all things, and really needed someone. And like she couldn't find anyone to go with her, and I was right in the area. And I told her, "Oh God, no, I'm not an interpreter. I don't have interpreting training. I'm not, super comfortable with that." But she was really in a pinch, and I ended up saying, "Okay, if as long as they understand that, this is sort of I'm doing this on a trial basis. I have no experience. And as long as they're forgiving, I'm willing to sort of give it a shot. And oh my God, it was such hard work. So there was a lot of preparation up front. The speakers varied tremendously in terms of the tone and content. The content was 1,000 times more technical than I ever thought it would be. So I thought Christmas tree is pretty simple, right? Like pine tree, put stuff on it, put it up in your living room. No, this was about logistics and science and understanding parasites and talking about the grain and all the different layers and saplings and the logistical distribution chains across North America and helicopters, flying pine trees in different places, to fix logistical problems. And it was so challenging. Wow. At the end of the day, I can tell you I was absolutely knackered, but it was a really interesting experience for sure. I don't know if I would do it again because I found it so challenging, but I really admire interpreters for what they do.
Did you have to deal with accents? Because sometimes, people who grow trees are also from Europe. I did a conference on growing up Christmas trees, and there were a lot of Northern Europeans, and their accents were they speak English with an accent. I mean,
Right.
like Norwegian or Finnish, and I was also struggling to understand because I was in my ear wasn't trained to it.
Right. Well, I was working into English, and so the people there, they were Quebecois, so I'm kind of used to their accent. I think what was harder is for the people who are working in the other direction, because we had people from like even places that don't sound very foreign or remote, like Massachusetts, but like a strong Massachusetts accent for a Quebecer who's not used to that. That's a challenge, right? And so I think it was harder for them. For me, I mean, I'm used to the Quebec accent by now. I've lived here for 20 years, so. For me, it was less of a problem, but just in terms of the content, I had enough of a challenge. It was a really fascinating experience, and it's interesting the feedback I got from the people. They said, there's a comment going around that people like your interpreting, but it's like this one guy when he's interpreting, he's actually explaining. That's not quite interpreting; it's explaining. I thought, gosh, I think they're onto something. I'm explaining. I'm not interpreting. It was really interesting. I don't think I quite got the mindset right.
Now, when it comes to translation, like going from voice to paper, like this is like this is your comfort zone, like the translation.
Exactly.
Yeah. And like, do you find it's because like you have more time, I guess, to find like the mots
Right.
as opposed to interpretation, or?
I think that's very much it, and we like that challenge. As translators, we like working with a written word because we have the time to mull things over. So translators tend to be fairly philosophical people. Even the more practical minded ones who do more technical translation tend to be people who like to ponder things. And it's funny, I was telling my colleague Anne-Marie about this recently. Like every single week, I have people who write to me, because I'm very active on LinkedIn. There are a lot of people following me and stuff. Every single week, I have people who write to me who are literally saying, can we please jump on a call and talk like the philosophy of translation or talk about the deep meaning of this word? And I basically have to say, no, I'm sorry. I have a job. I can't spend my days talking about, philology or the philosophy of translation or like, but a lot of translators are sort of philosophically inclined or like to mull things over. They like to ponder things. And certainly I count myself among them. I'm a translator myself. It's just I have to sometimes set boundaries because otherwise, like I would spend all day just having random conversations about deep meanings of things. I see sort of the same trend in researchers because I primarily translate research for universities. That's most of what I do as a translator. So I translate academic articles and collective works and things like that, reports into English. So I kind of see a little bit of the same thing in researchers. Like they love to dig deep and find the deep meaning of the words and reflect on them and take all the time. Of course, with interpreting, you can't quite do that, right?
No.
Would you say that there's a personality difference between translators and interpreters, being the fact that in interpretation you got to think fast, yeah, everything is right now, and you got to push, and in translation, as you said, you're more like philosophers.
Definitely. I see it with interpreters. I find they're people who are quick on their feet. They're quick-witted, and I feel like in some ways perhaps interpreters are a little bit more fluid. Translators, like many translators are like me. I'm a one-track mind kind of guy. If my wife asks me to do two things at the same time, like something's going to fall apart, something's going to break, like I can't do it. I can only do one thing at a time. I'm very bad at multitasking, in fact, but that works well as a translator because I'm sitting down and working on difficult texts for extended periods of time. And I kind of have that selective focus where I can focus in depth on one thing for a long time. So yeah, it's definitely a sort of perhaps a difference there.
Now, we have certain standards in the interpretation industry, like in terms of like how long you should interpret for, and just to give your brain a break and stuff like that. Now, I've also heard like translators like pulling all-nighters, like because there's a deadline. Like, is there like a key to like manage that so that you're not working all night, or like do you have to take multiple breaks or work in teams, or how does that work?
Right. So the primary issue I find with working without taking breaks, of course, it's not really human, right? Everyone in all different fields, we all need breaks. But I do find that unfortunately, there's a very prevalent attitude, both in sort of the corporate translation world with agencies and people who work solo, that we can sort of do it indefinitely, or we don't need those breaks, or we can just keep going. But cognitive fatigue is real. And I've done a little bit of sort of looking around under the hood, and I've come up with a theory for why translators tend to get very tired. I used to be exhausted at the end of the day, just completely wiped out. And I really believe that part of the problem is decision fatigue. Because if you think about it, with every single word, with every expression, with every locution, with every phrase, every sentence, every paragraph, we're making difficult choices, right? And that's very, 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 very mentally tiring. So if you look at other professions like judges, for example, they have to make difficult decisions too, but they have breaks strategically built into their day because they can't be making those decisions all day long, right? And
Hmm.
studies have even shown that if they don't take sufficient breaks, as the day wears on, they get harsher in their sentencing. For example, they'll grant less probation. So in translation, I think it's a problem. We often do not take sufficient breaks. We often don't recognize that our brains get tired. We sometimes think we're impervious to the laws of, of nature and we don't need it, but we really do. And I think the day that you start taking proper care of yourself, then your career will only benefit because we need the breaks desperately, just like interpreters do. But I feel like there's not a lot of recognition of that currently in the translation world.
Hmm.
Is it because there's a lot of freelancers out there, and people don't self-manage as well? The when you're working by yourself, you're not necessarily thinking about those things, but when you're working for, let's say, a company or an organization, then it would be something that they had time to think of.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. I think you're onto something there. I like to tell people too, if you think about an employer, there are certain federal requirements, right? Like you're supposed to be entitled to at least 15 minutes of break in your morning and 15 in your afternoon. And that's true in like many countries, right? So at the very least, even if you're a freelancer, you should be as good to yourself as a boss would be, right? You have to be a good boss unto yourself. So I try to encourage people to at least take that 15-minute break, because otherwise, like your performance will decline, and you may not realize that your work quality is going down, but it really is. So I think it's an issue. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was my first job when I finished university was actually a translator in house. It's the only time I
Hmm.
had a boss, so so that didn't last long. It lasted about a year and a half, and then I was like, nope, I need to go do something else. But yeah, you're right. Like that structure of like the 15 minutes in the morning, and then like a half-hour lunch, and then 15 minutes in the afternoon, and then you're done your workday, and that's it. Like you disconnect for the day. Like that's um like that. I didn't never felt tired at the end of the day. Like it was grueling because you're doing a lot of translations for like really little pieces of automotive parts and like what they
Hmm.
do and how they function and all this stuff. But it wasn't as tiring as when I became a freelancer and I was like, oh yeah, you got this 10,000 word assignment that's due to like in 2 days. Like let's get this done like as quickly as possible. And like if it requires pulling an all nighter, that's what happens. And I just didn't know any better because I was a freelancer just starting off. And uh, does your Lion translation, does that cover anything with like work life balance and that kind of thing? Or can you explain a bit what your academy does?
Sure. So, in a nutshell, Lion Translation Academy is my platform that I run with Anne Marie Boulanger. We're both French into English translators, but we both have French names, so go figure. And in a nutshell, what we do is we offer training on business. We're really focused on marketing and business these days, but we also teach language and productivity courses. And like next week, I'm doing one on Gen AI. So, 9 things every translator should know going into 2025. So, we also sort of run the gamut and do technology. That is the subject of a workshop I'm going to be doing in early 2025 on productivity and goal setting. And hopefully, at the very least, if we can have a conversation about it, I think it will help. I will say, in terms of your own experience and pulling an all-nighter, thankfully, the good news is as you gain experience as a translator and you become more in demand, if you do your marketing effectively and get too much work, which is a good problem to have, then you can be very selective, right? So I don't do all-nighters because, I only accept certain things. I actually decline a lot of what comes across my desk. And paradoxically, early in my career, I would have been terrified to say no to clients. But now I say no all the time, and clients want me more and are willing to pay more, and they're running after me. So there's also something interesting
to all
there.
of us.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, when you're double booked or triple booked, oh my goodness.
How would you you touched a little bit on the topic of AI, and for instance, I have a friend right now at Laval University, and she decided to start a program, bachelor's degree in translation, and she called me about 2 years ago, just when ChatGPT was coming in and all these AI tools were coming about, and she was like, "Oh, am I?" Starting to study into something that will not be there in 5, 10, 15 years? Or do you think these are just enhancing tools? Do you think we'll still need to be translators? Or do you think that translation will shape into something different? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I could spend a whole day just talking about that. I'll try to be really selective and give you a few thoughts. So, first of all, taking a 10,000-foot view of the translation world, I don't like the word industry, but if you look at the translation landscape, volumes keep going up year after year, and overall, the language industry, in terms of translation, it's valued at it's well over $50 billion globally. And it keeps growing, and it's growing faster than the average profession. In fact, the average growth year on year is something like 7% in translation, and it's closer to 3, optimistically maybe 4 across all professions combined. So in terms of the sheer work that's out there, there's plenty of work. Now, what we are seeing with AI is as some of the work is sometimes going to agencies that are using AI in some cases and that are unfortunately lowering rates significantly, that's creating some pressure and some strain. And we are seeing the mid-market shrink. So a lot of the easier stuff to translate is going to go to people that use AI and just have a quick cleanup done through an agency. So there is some of that, and not all agencies do this, but it's a phenomenon to be aware of. There are also great agencies with wonderful values that are upholding good standards in our industry too. And the same thing is true of freelancers, really. But globally, the demand is going up. We also see that the average age of translators is quite high. I believe it's over 50 years old. And generally speaking, the average age across all professions is something like 35. So the average age of translators is very, very high right now. And there are translators going off to retire and who will be retiring, especially the boomers, retiring very shortly, imminently in the coming years. So, and concurrently, you see a lot of university programs in translation, have very low enrollments. Some of them have shuttered here in Canada. And so if you just think about it globally for a second, they're higher than ever demands. The workforce is quite an older population. And then you look at very few people entering the field because of the fears of AI. And you can see that there actually may be a really great opportunity here because the AI cannot do the translation work. It can be helpful for getting you unstuck. It can give you a rough draft that you can clean up for certain types of text and save you some time. But we still need humans. And as long as AI does not understand anything, we are fine. Translators are still going to be necessary for image sensitive text, no doubt about it.
What piece of advice would you give? Because I'm sure that after we release this podcast, a lot of translators are going to be watching this. So, since you're a seasoned translator, what advice would you give to the newcomers that are coming in the market? And if they're looking for opportunities out there, where should they look?
Right on. So it's really quite simple. If you want to have a booming translation business and a successful career, you really need to specialize. That would be my number one piece of advice. If you are another translator who's out there saying, I've got X number of years of experience and I just translate whatever you send my way, you've got a Hotmail address, that's not going to cut it. in the coming years. It's not going to cut it. And that may actually be good news in the sense that we're going to have to up our game collectively as a profession and learn to market a little bit. Other professions have learned this stuff, right? These are totally learnable skills. But in a nutshell, you need to specialize and you need to show your clients your value. So by talking about your specializations and having credentials in those areas, you can do very well. I know many translators who, for example, do pharmaceutical translation and they never want for work. Quite the opposite. They have too much all the time and have to keep raising their rates. So that's one piece of the puzzle, is I would say it's very important to specialize and to learn like the basics of marketing so that you know how to showcase your expertise in a way that will speak to clients, because it's not about you, it's about the client. It's about the outcome that they are looking for. And then the other piece I would say, so number one is specialize. And number two, I do think that in the coming years, it's a really good idea to develop valuable, complementary, closely related skills that will just allow you to offer a complete package. So like to give you a down-to-earth example of this, there are translators who are passionate about SEO. And so they can learn to do SEO translation and offer those services. And that is extremely, extremely, extremely valuable. It's sort of a combination of understanding search engines and a lot of statistical information, and also text and also writing and copywriting and all these things. And by the way, I just said another one out loud, copywriting. Copywriting is another thing that you can absolutely add to your gamut of services. These are learnable skills. There are programs for these things that you can go through to gain, solid credentials. And so I'm not saying that you necessarily need to be a jack of all trades, but I am saying it's wise to specialize, and it's also wise to think about adding value in your services. So if you offer SEO translation, someone just actually wrote on a post of mine right before we jumped on this call, someone was writing on LinkedIn, I've teamed up with a graphic designer, and since I do SEO as a translator and she's able to do graphic design, we're able to offer a complete package. So translators that I know that are doing this kind of thing, and there are many permutations of this, right? The possibilities are endless. Find something you're passionate about, team up with another expert if you want, and then offer value-added services, because in the future, the more you can bundle things together, the more clients will tend to see the full value of the translation.
Cool. Do you think that translation, because of all these tools, some clients or some people out there might not see the value anymore, because people who don't know will jump to the conclusion that, oh, it's easy now. You just put it into a DeepL or ChatGPT and you get a result, and that's your work. So we're going to cut your rates or anything else.
Yes, unfortunately, I agree with that prognosis. I do think that because these tools are so widespread, because they are free in many cases, so they are more democratized, for example, than in other professions. These are issues. So for example, if you go to a dentist and they're using a new AI diagnosis tool, because it's not a democratized tool and it requires a lot of specialization to be able to understand it and run it, people will understand if the dentist is charging a little bit more to use a tool that adds value. So here's where it gets interesting, though. If you think about what we do as translators, if we're using technology, for example, DeepL, okay, just throw it out there as an example. If you're using it and you're able to deliver your text one day faster to your client, the real question we should be asking ourselves is not, is it worth less? The real question we should be asking is, for the client, if they get the translation earlier, one day earlier, is that objectively worth more money or less money? Right? That's the question we should be asking. Objectively speaking, if they're getting something faster because you invested in a specialized tool that enables you to deliver the same quality, but a little bit faster for them, you're paying for this tool, you're investing in the tool, you're taking training on this tool, right? Maybe through Lion Translation Academy, right? So why on earth would you start charging less? Because you are adding value to your services. So there is a negative public perception, and you're right. There's a consumer awareness issue. However, it can be solved, at least partly, simply by positioning ourselves differently and speaking to our clients the way that other professions are doing it, so that you can talk about value for them. If they get the translation a day early, that's huge, right? Most translations are time sensitive. So there are solutions out there. I have a complete value kit that I'm putting together for translators and interpreters right now with the whole toolkit of solutions and down-to-earth things you can do in your everyday life to help clients understand your value and be more than willing to pay premium rates. the great news is that these are learnable skills, right? Other professions got on board. I think with translation, we're not there yet, perhaps because we're a very young profession, as a regulated profession, at least with bodies like OTAC, we're a very young profession compared to others that have had perhaps a little more time to figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah,
think
no,
it has
because
to do with the personality of the translators? Because translators, as you said earlier in the conversation, a lot of people like to philosophize and think about things and simmer things. Do you think that the personality, again, has a link with the way you market yourself?
Yes, I think you're right. And I in fact, I put this in my marketing course copy that, if you hate marketing, this course is for you. Because it's going to be translator friendly. And one of the things I love to show people in my courses is that if you're an introvert, because many translators, this comes down to being an introvert, right? They don't like putting themselves out there. They don't like negotiating. They don't like having to be assertive. They'd much rather be at home reading a book, which I 100% get. But the good news is, these same qualities of introverts are actually, they've been studied. Okay. There are like business schools that have studied this stuff. And you can actually do really, really well in business as an introvert. You really it's more of a mindset shift. You have to say, what qualities do I have as an introvert that would help me to be more successful? So a down-to-earth sort of quick example I could give you is that many translators simply receive an email from a client and say yes or no, right? Like, here's my price. I'll take it. I won't take it. Why not do a 5-minute call with your client to say, hi, I'm Joe. I'd love to hear a little bit about your project. Tell me what you're up to. If you do that, you're leveraging your introvert strengths because it's one-on-one conversation. You can leverage your deep empathy, your capacity to work closely with people, and your deep thinking skills. And so when you meet with clients, you can easily add value, uncover pain points, make a more effective offer just by meeting with them. And so a lot of the strategies I teach are not necessarily hard, and they're not difficult for introverts, but it's just the shift in thinking to say, hey, yeah, I'm an introvert. How can I use that to my advantage in my marketing, right? So that's sort of what I try to teach people in my courses.
That's really great for newcomers. Like I find that that's really fascinating because a lot of times, like people, you're right, they go to university or they college or an academy and they learn how to be translators, but they don't necessarily know how to market themselves, and they don't realize that once they become professional translators, they also have to do their own bookkeeping and accounting and marketing and you name it, like client care, like everything is balled into like being able to be the best you can be at selling yourself, on top of just being a translator, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in some cases I've coached translators and audited some of their messages to clients. And the kind of spooky part about it sometimes, just kind of came out of Halloween. So it's sort of spooky in a way, but like we're not always aware of our own shortcomings. And that's where sometimes it's like um, the unknown unknowns can be a problem. So, for example, sometimes I've audited translators' communications and they didn't realize they were actually being really rude in their emails. Just like, yes, I have the document, fix the typo on page 57. And looking at the document, I'm going like, have you read your email? Like, you actually sent this to another human being? And it's not at all from any ill intention. It's just that, as language people, we're typically not trained in business, like you said. So a lot of people don't realize that they're not being courteous. They're not meeting with their clients. They're not building a deeper relationship. And so sometimes it can help to get an outside perspective because it's like, hey, have you thought of this? Did you know that people in other fields do that? And by incorporating simple elements, you can really up your game quite quickly. But yeah, we often do make mistakes with our marketing because we haven't been taught how to do it. So, but in the future, I don't think that's going to be enough, right?
No, I
So
don't
if you're
think
just
so.
fresh out of university, you got to know that you need to specialize. You need to know that you have to learn marketing and basic business course, basic business administration things
Like
in order to
communication
succeed.
skills. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think you necessarily need to go and like do a big certification or get an MBA, go back to school or anything like that. It's more like learn the basics that matter for translators. And this is basically my whole work that I'm doing with Lion Translation Academy is to make very simple resources available that teach you the least you need to know. So it's not about learning all of customer service. It's about what do translators need to know that will really move the needle for your business today, like simple stuff. So I'm trying to make this stuff super accessible and even sometimes, dare I say, fun, because we may instinctively hate the idea of marketing and sales, but I actually got really interested and passionate about the topic when I started realizing, hey, it doesn't have to be hard. It's just a few small actions every day that can get you big results simply by connecting a little bit more effectively with your clients.
Yeah, that applies for our industry as well. Yeah, that's really something. Now, speaking of our industries, any tips on like how to talk to clients about whether they need a translator or an interpreter? Because we always get like, I need a translator, but in reality, they need an interpreter. Do you guys get that too, or no?
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, sure, we get that too, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
And many people are not aware of the distinction between the two words, so you have to explain it to them.
Sometimes I'll get a request. It's oh, we need a voice translator. I'm like, oh, you need an interpreter.
Voice translator, that's funny.
But yeah, no, you're right about the whole quality and everything with all of the AI stuff coming, because like we use quite a bit, like Alain and I, like if we get documents from a client in English and we have a presentation to give, like we'll quickly put it through like DeepL or something like that, and then get like a rough copy of what they're saying in French. It's an aid, like it helps us out. It's not like we have to also be careful because sometimes there's a mistranslation, like you can't trust it 100%. Generally speaking, it's fairly good and it does help us do our job better. But like going back to the day when I was a translator in 2003 and I was researching car terms and going to physical dictionaries because there wasn't anything online yet, and Termium was starting up with their CD that you can purchase, and so like yeah, I think that
You
now,
bought it?
yeah, I bought the Termium
I
CD.
didn't.
No, and
I
then
got a
They'll
copy.
probably sell it on eBay
I
for a
got,
fortune today.
probably yeah, it's a relic.
at university we were all copying it each
There's
like
a certificate of authenticity next to it. But yeah, that was the back in the day. But like, I would feel proud to be able to give that translation to my clients. So when I was, or like the employer, and who will give it to his clients. Whereas now, like if I put something through DeepL, that's just for me, and I'm not going to be sending this out to anybody because I would be embarrassed to make this my final product, right? So
Right.
that's something that the client needs to understand too. Like it's not like a catch-all where you can just throw a document into an AI and it automatically generates something for you, right?
No,
do
that's
you
exactly right. And I mean, the other thing is that I think what is fueling this today, as we come to the close of 2024, is there are so many AI app developers that are talking about one-click translations. I actually have a little folder where I took screenshots of every one-click translation tool that I saw out there, and I've just like reams of it, right? Everyone's saying translation in one click. And even one of the prominent um, neural machine translation developers put this in their marketing. Then they took it down, probably because of complaints, and they were denounced on social media, as they should have been. That's not right. It's not true that it's one click. But unfortunately, there are actors that will put that out there in space. People trying to make a quick buck with a Chat GPT, API app that's going to translate your content. They have a vested interest in saying that it's all one click today. Just do a quick read, you're good. And so we're seeing so much of that one click translation sort of discourse out there today. That's a bit of a problem. But of course, if you use just the first draft translation, it's not going to be usable for publication quality.
Well, do you think that the job of a proofreader and a translator might fuse, or do you think that there's more of a proofreader aspect that the translator will have to do? Because back in the day, I remember there was a program for translation at university, and there was a program for proofreader, a program for terminology. But do you think that, let's say 5, 10 years down the road, as the tools get better, the job of a translator will actually have to have a lot of more proofreading in both languages rather than simply focusing on the translation part?
It's interesting. There are experts that have examined this question. One interesting place you can go is to Brian Mossop and his wonderful books on post editing and what they mean about the status of the profession. And one of the things you'll find repeated in all the studies in his collective work, just came out last year, is basically that to revise a machine translation properly and hand in the same quality as a human translation, you need a translator. So that has not really changed because you basically need two things, right? You need the linguistic aptitude to create a beautiful, flowing, idiomatic, grammatically correct text. And you also need the cultural nuance that comes from generally understanding the text and then understanding the context where it's located. So because of that, you need a translator to post-edit. You can't simply have anyone who's, any unilingual reader just read over the target language text and fix it up. So you still need a translator and you need translation skills to clean up these texts. But there is sometimes that perception. And I think the perception that it's more about proofreading comes from the actual action that we perform, which is, as we work more and more with AI, we spend more time revising than we do typing and writing translations from scratch. And that's been proven with NMT. And that is okay. I personally have no problem with that. I would not go back to typing out every letter of every word. And when I have to do it when I'm writing an email, it drives me insane. I'm going, are you serious? I have to write one letter at a time? One letter at a time? Are you kidding me? So the tools are evolving, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's just learning to adapt effectively.
Yeah, I mean, my mom, she was an interpreter for many years, and she also did some translation work. And she started with a typewriter,
Yep.
and dictionary, physical dictionary. And like if she made a mistake, she'd have to go back, and then there was like a special whiteout thing that you would put in, so you could press the key again, and it whites it out, and it looks horrible, like the final
Wow, that's
product.
high tech though.
But, oh yeah, I know, eh? So
Cutting
like,
edge.
I'm glad we're away from those days. But yeah, but back then, like that, again, like that was like a source of pride. Like you took the page out of the typewriter and you're like, this is my work. Like I'm so proud of
Right.
it. Whereas like I feel nowadays like this is lost a bit with all the tools that we have available, because like it does a lot of the work for you, and at the end you're like, oh yeah, like that word was pretty good. Like I'm gonna keep it. Like it's not your own. In a way, it's not your own work anymore. Like it's you get like some of it is, but not all of it is. Like I don't know if I'm explaining myself properly. Whereas like back in the day, 100% of the work was you, whereas now it's not. The percentages are off, right? Like,
Right, and there's also a distinction we could make, a very important distinction between post editing per se, like post editing proper. In other words, you get a text that's been translated by a machine and you clean up whatever mess the machine created, right? That is the definition of post editing, strictly speaking. And then there's what I like to call translating. And translating means that you're working in whatever environment you choose. It could be a translation memory, for example, and you have access to reference documents. You have your translation memory reminding you of previous translations you or your colleagues have used. You have access to online resources to find correct terms and phraseology and things like that. And so you also have AI that's suggesting a draft for segments where sometimes it's helpful. To me, those processes are absolutely night and day. So post editing is just cleaning up a machine mess. Translating is where you work in your environment, and you may or may not use AI tools as just one tool in your kit. And increasingly, we also have other tools like Gen AI, like a really good
Can you
use
give
of
a
this.
what's you mentioned already Gen AI before? I'm not familiar with it. I thought it was like another translation tool. What's Gen AI?
So generative AI is any of these chatbots today that create something. So they may create
Okay,
images based on a prompt. They may create text. They can create other things too now. Increasingly, there
like
are things like text to
ChatGPT.
video, like ChatGPT. ChatGPT is the groundbreaking, the one that came out in November 2023, really changed the game. Or was it 22? I don't even know anymore.
22. It's 22 already.
22 already. So
Yeah,
anyway,
late 2022.
it's,
Fact
but
checkers will tell us.
yeah, they'll tell us in the comments, I'm sure, if we're wrong. But so generative AI is also useful. So a good example of how to use Gen AI, very simple, is I will translate a creative text. Okay, I do not use any machine help because I'm going to use my own gray matter. I'm going to use my brain and my own background and expertise and cultural nuance and all that stuff. I'm going to do my own translation. But then once I'm done my draft, I will go to ChatGPT. And I did this a while back with a text I was translating for a magazine that was talking about crafting your own beer. Okay, so I translated the text, but then I went to ChatGPT and I said, just write me a 250-page text about rolling out a new beer and use a bunch of great idiomatic expressions. And the text that it pumped out was so over the top, it was just silly. But there were some really, really, really great finds in there that I was able to incorporate into my text to really bring it to that next level. So expressions I hadn't thought of. They were talking about tapping into your customers' preferred beers or flavors. They were talking about brimming with ideas. The steady pipeline of innovative beers that were rolling out. Like it was just endless, and it was so funny. And
So the
I
machine
wouldn't.
can be creative.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. Surprisingly, it's a sort of a Wild West where it'll throw out all kinds of ideas, many of them silly or, you know, crazy or haphazard, but some of them turn out to be just that thing that you never would have thought of, but that's super helpful for your translation.
Sounds like barrels of fun.
It is so fun.
I'll drink to that.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. Yeah, and like I'm just thinking, I'm like, yeah, like just the terminology and stuff like that. Like if you're say like SeaWorld was going to open a new attraction in France, and they have like the whales and the dolphins and the seals and stuff, and then there's like this like specific manual on like seals and like how what they eat and what they like and how much water they need, and all of a sudden there's like a also like if it meets all the standards, you get a seal of approval. Or like if you if you have a valve that has to have a protective seal on it, I'm like, will the AI know that it's not the animal and that it's, they're different seals? Not to mention that in French the word seal, it sounds a lot like the English F word, right?
Right,
So
right, right.
does it going to be filled with F words all over the document? Like,
Well, that's why, there's no real risk, I think, of translators or interpreters not being needed because the machine can't tell. There's no genuine understanding. Now, in all fairness, it can mimic understanding. It can produce human-like things that are surprisingly good sounding at first glance. But because it doesn't understand things, there will always be silly, crazy, often dangerous stuff in the text that it produces.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
But humans also make mistakes, and humans also sometimes get confused about certain things. So I know we don't have like 3 hours to dig into this sort of philosophy. What is it? What is it to be a human, or what is it to really understand, or does the machine at a deeper level really understands? But at the same time, I think that the expectation on the machine is much higher than a human being. If a human being makes a mistake, you're like, oh, you're just learning, or you're new, or you don't have enough experience, or you don't know enough. And we'll be okay with it and we'll just move on. But when it's the machine, we'll say, hey, see, you know what? The machine can't do everything that the human being can do.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. And I kind of, one thing that comes to mind for me as I'm listening to you is this may be an opportunity to add value too. Like if a client sends you a text and you're not sure of what a term means in context, which happens all the time, right? If you go back to them and say, hey, I read over your text and there are a couple spots here I'm not quite sure what you meant. Did it mean this, or that? When the client sees that and they're able to confirm what they actually meant, then they can be certain that they're getting an accurate translation. Whereas the machine will pretend it understood everything and create something human-like, but it will never ask. It will never think to ask, hey, I didn't quite understand what this meant, because it doesn't fundamentally understand. It mimics what someone might say in a given context. At the end of the day, that's really all it can do, as impressive as it is at first glance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the hallucination part of the machine, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, wow. This is all so fascinating. I wish we had more time to talk about it because we, like you said, Joe, like we can keep going and going on some of the topics that we just kind of brushed upon. And we'd love to have you back if you're interested. I know you're a busy man, so and you
I'd
have a
be delighted.
family.
Anytime.
Yeah.
And if anyone wants to find out about my course next week, it's Gen AI, 9 things every translator and interpreter needs to know going into 2025 and what to do about them. So we'll be putting that in the show notes. And
And what's
yeah,
the like what word could they find it? Like is it www.liontranslations.com or
you can head over to liontranslationacademy.com, all in one word, liontranslationacademy.com, and it's right there on the homepage. If you want to check it out, we have lots of great tips. I'll give you one more really good one before we sign off here, because this might be super helpful to translators and interpreters. So one way that you can use ChatGPT really cleverly is if you come across an abbreviation or an acronym and you have no idea what it means. One thing you can do is you can go to the machine and say, hey, I'm working on document XYZ. Let's say it's a university transcript, and I see FP with no context. The general topic is, I don't know, let's talk about learning mechanical engineering. You can say, tell me what this might mean in context. And it'll give you a whole bunch of ideas, what it might mean in France, what it might mean in Quebec, what it might mean in a different part of the world. And it's gotten me unstuck several times. So I love to share this little tip, because if you get stuck with abbreviations and acronyms, you can poke around with generative AI and it might actually hit on what they were trying to get across in that abbreviation.
Would you say that ChatGPT is the one to go to first, or are there any others? Have you tested like Claude or any other that might be out there?
Yeah, they all have their strengths and weaknesses. Claude is more for long form content and sort of storytelling. That's its superpower, if you will. ChatGPT is really known for its creativity. So for brainstorming, go to ChatGPT.
Cool.
Have you tried Gemini?
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
I haven't tried it much. I know the ratings are, it's not typically considered quite as powerful as ChatGPT, but the great superpower is that it integrates with the complete Google suite. So a lot of people appreciate that. I haven't tested it very much, but every different bot out there has a different strength and weakness. And you can go to them and ask them as well. It's quite funny to go to them and say, hey, what are you good at? What are you bad at? And give me a table comparing you with all the other main chatbots out there. And in just
will
a
it
couple
be
of
honest,
seconds,
or will it lie to make sure that it sees itself as the best one?
Well, that's a good question.
I think we'll have to test it out on our own.
Yeah, you have to test it out and see. Yeah, there are some that will fact check for you. One that you can check out is perplexity.ai that fact checks all the information it gives you. So that is on the way, and you can go and try out perplexity.ai if you want to see one of these first ever fact checked AI bots out there.
Need that for this podcast.
That would have been useful for the election.
Oh yeah,
yes, absolutely.
Yes. Perplexity, check Biden or not Biden. I'm sorry, Trump or Harris. Yeah, it's tonight. Anybody? Anyway, we don't have time.
Yeah, and when you think about it, you've got more and more of these very powerful tools that can be used to create fake news and to create deepfakes and things like that. And then you have more and more that are coming out that are fact checking. And there are tools out there that can check if your text was AI generated. So it's sort of a war going on right now, a war of the machines to see what's going to win out. And yeah, it's a bit of a crazy world out there.
Absolutely.
Wow. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you again, Joe. This was awesome. It was
my pleasure.
Yeah. And I hope we can do this again soon.
Absolutely.
Right. So everyone, thank you very much for listening this week. This podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, and pretty soon on every other platform. So if you want to reach Joachim, you can head out to, once again,
LionTranslationAcademy.com.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brian.
One last plug.
And one last. Yeah, why not? That's what we're for too. Okay. All right, guys. So see you next time.
All right. Take care.
Bye for now.
Bye.